right.
Okay. Well, hello. Thank you for joining us for the Secret World of Soil and the St. Croix, which will be about 50 minutes. My name is Cassie. My name is Cassie Hargrave, and I work for Wild Rivers. Sorry, we're just having some technical difficulties here. I work with Wild Rivers Conservancy as an invasive species field technician. I will be in the background moderating the chat and helping with any technical difficulties during this session. Before we begin, I would like to mention a couple of housekeeping notes. On the right of your screen, you will see a chat box. To keep things simple, the chat is where we would like you to share your questions and comments. If you have any questions during the presentation, we encourage you to type those questions into the chat and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. This session is being recorded and will be made permanently available on the Wild Rivers Conservancy YouTube account. With the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker and give the rest of the time to them. Please welcome Claire Volk, who is an environmental educator with Wild Rivers Conservancy.
All right. Hello, everyone. And is everyone able to see my screen? All right. Oh, let's see. Okay, well, welcome. And as Cassie said, my name is Claire, and I am the environmental educator at Wild Rivers Conservancy. Thanks for joining today. I will note that I have an automatic light here, so if it goes dark, just be patient with me, maybe waving my hands back and forth to turn the light back on. But I'm really excited that you're all here today. We're going to be talking about the secret world of soil in the St. Croix watershed. So this is going to include some information about the geologic history of the area, what soil really is, and then the importance of soil, and also looking into the future between soil and climate change. So if you have any questions throughout, please throw them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. All right, I do just want to take a quick minute and highlight the St. Croix watershed and what Wild Rivers Conservancy does. So we are the official nonprofit partner for the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, which is managed by the National Park Service. And the Wild Rivers Conservancy and National Park Service work together to protect, preserve, and teach people about the St. Croix and Namakagon rivers. And you can actually see those outlined in blue in our watershed map there. And then as the environmental educator at Wild Rivers Conservancy, my focus is on getting students like you outside and learning about the watershed and all of the rivers in it. Excuse me. So just a reminder, clarification, a watershed is an area of land where all of water runs into the same place. So in the St. Croix watershed, all of those streams that you see on the map there run into the St. Croix River. And the watershed is about the size of New Jersey, and it's in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. All right, let's jump into the geological history of the St. Croix watershed. And today we're going to take a trip backwards in time. So together we'll explore how the earth around us used to look and why that is. For a little bit of context, billions of years is pretty hard to comprehend. The earth is about 4.6 billion years old, and humans or human ancestors have been around for about 6 million years. So some of the rocks on Earth are also billions of years old. So the Earth and the rocks on it are a lot older than humans are. But that means that whenever we look at rocks, we can get a little piece of history of what the Earth looked like that very long time ago. All right, so we're gonna hop into the time machine and have our first stop. And we have arrived in Minnesota about 3.6 billion years ago. The rock on the left gives us a picture of what the landscape around us would have looked like. And then we can hop on in, quickly jump to Wisconsin about 2.8 billion years ago. And the picture on the right has some rocks that were in Wisconsin at 2.8 billion years ago. And I do want to mention that both of these rocks, these types of rocks, have undergone some changes throughout time. So those billions of years ago, they might have looked just a little bit different than they do now, but it is a clue to what once was before, not the entire story. And though these rocks aren't in the watershed, they're both in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and I wanted to mention them just so we can really have an idea of how old some of the rocks in our area are. All right, let's travel to 1.7 billion years ago. As you step out, you might notice that we're no longer sitting or standing, we're swimming. The area we are in right now was actually completely underwater with tropical seas and sands. We don't have any fossil evidence during this time, but we do have some sandstone along the St. Croix as evidence to these seas. So if you were alive and standing here 1.7 billion years ago, everything would be covered in very shallow and warm salt water. And I don't know about you guys, but that's pretty hard for me to believe sometimes because we're known for our snowy and cold winters in the area. Maybe not this last winter, but we normally are. All right, everyone back in. We're going to our next destination and we're traveling to 1.1 billion years ago. And during this time, something really major happened. We call it the mid-continent rift. So a rift is a crack, a split, or a break in something. And the mid-continent rift was the land cracking and splitting apart. So as you look around, make sure to keep your feet steady and hold on to something because the continent is literally splitting in two. So the rift, as it was splitting and breaking, it was releasing a huge amount of lava, which covered most of this red area that you see on the map. And that was about 1,200 miles long, right in the middle of the continent. And as this lava was released, it began to cool, and as it cooled, it formed and turned into rock. We call this rock basalt. And we actually see evidence of this rift today in the basalt cliffs in Wisconsin and Minnesota Interstate Park, and that's the picture on the right there. So some of you may have been there before. And I think it's a pretty neat piece of evidence that we can see from this time 1.1 billion years ago. All right, jump back in. We are now to 540 million years ago, and we are underwater again. We have more shallow and tropical seas that came into the area, and we actually called these the Paleozoic seas. And we see evidence of these seas in a couple of different ways. We can see large amounts of sandstone along the riverway, which is the picture on the right, as well as on the left is some fossils that were found in the St. Croix area. And again, I think it's pretty cool to imagine everything underwater in chilly Wisconsin and Minnesota. And as I said, we have some fossil evidence, so the seas may have looked something like this with lots of different creatures around. All right, we have our last stop in the time machine before present day. And you might have noticed that there's a pretty big jump in time between the tropical seas and sands about 540 million years ago to the last glaciation about 75,000 years ago. And there was a lot that happened in that in-between time. For example, about 80 million years ago, we know that dinosaurs roamed the landscape, but most of the evidence of these different time periods has been wiped away by that last glaciation. And I thought it might be a little bit safer to not stop our time machine when there were dinosaurs. But yeah, and I do want to mention as well that the timeline here says last glaciation was 75,000 years ago, which is true, but the ice age or different stages of it happened for a really, really long time, starting more than 2.5 million years ago. And the glaciers actually began moving into our area, our watershed, about 30,000 years ago. So that's the time we're going to be focusing on. Okay, everybody, take a deep breath. That was a lot of numbers, but we're going to focus on the ice age from 30,000 years ago. Okay, so what was the ice age even? I don't know about you all, but I think of the Ice Age movie series, which I loved when I was your age, and maybe you have seen and also love, but it was a real event as well. So it was a huge climate change event in the history of the Earth. The Earth was going through these cycles of heating and cooling, and during the colder times, huge glaciers would advance and retreat. And as they did this, they were depositing and scraping the landscape, picking up and leaving rocks and mineral material that was in their path. And the ice sheet that came through Wisconsin and Minnesota is this picture on the left. And this is just of Wisconsin, but if you look in the top right, you can see that it was also covering Minnesota as well. And they began to retreat. So they started about 30,000 years ago and began to retreat about 10,000 years ago. So during this time, when we had the Ice Age happening and with active glaciers in our area, it looked a lot different outside compared to what it does now. Both parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota was just covered by this huge sheet of ice or a glacier. But what really is a glacier? I think we hear that word a lot, and sometimes we can say, oh, it's a lot of ice or it's snow, but it's actually something pretty neat. So a glacier is just a huge amount of ice, and this ice actually isn't just ice. It holds a lot of different things, including rocks and sediments and minerals. As you can see in this picture here, it's not just white or blue or clear snow or ice. It has those streaks of brown and gray with that sediment and those rocks in it. And a glacier actually is so heavy. There's so much ice that the ice piles up on top of itself, and the pressure underneath on the bottom is so great that it becomes a liquid. And that's why we can say that the glacier snow or honey or molasses. So as these glaciers are moving, they're moving really, really slowly, like syrup kind of would against the ground. And they're so heavy with all of that ice that they're picking up sediment, they're cutting through rock as they move, and they're just completely scraping the landscape. And as they're doing this, they're just totally moving things around and changing things up and creating different landforms that we can see still today. So the glaciers moved in, they scraped a lot, and then as they retreated, they deposited a lot as well. So as the glaciers retreated for the last time, the earth was getting warmer, and they also were melting. So they left behind a huge amount of water, and it was so much water that it caused massive flooding and huge rivers that turned into lakes that we have today and carved new river valleys. So the St. Croix River Valley was actually completely reshaped from flooding from the meltwater from the glaciers. Okay, so we have some really cool evidence in the watershed of glaciers coming through. And a couple of my favorites are these pictures that I took at Wisconsin Interstate Park. And the photo on the left and on the right are of potholes that were caused when massive flooding came through and completely just scarred the rock. And then the center one, we just talked about the St. Croix, but I really am thankful to the glaciers for rerouting the St. Croix Valley and putting it in our area. All right, and then, like I said, there's lots of different landforms and things that the glaciers left behind. There's different features like moraines, glacial erratics, which are giant boulders, and more that you might see every day all around you. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. The one on the left is called an esker, and an esker is actually formed from an underground tunnel that was in the glacier. And there was a river running through the tunnel, and there was sediment just piling up on this river. And as the glacier retreated and melted, it left the sediment, so we see a snaky ridge of what a river used to be. And then another landform that we have is a kettle. And I know that Minnesota is known as the land of lakes, and Wisconsin also has a huge amount of lakes. And this is actually from huge ice chunks falling off the glacier as it's retreating, these chunks getting buried by sediment, the the ice melting and creating the lakes. So we have the glaciers to thank for our lake countries and lots of different lakes in the area. I'm very thankful for that. I don't know about you guys. But yeah, that's just a few of the many different types that you could see all over the landscape in this area and also anywhere that glaciers have passed through. Okay, so now you know a little bit about the geologic history of the area, I just wanted to give you guys a quick peek into glacial movement, just so we can understand it a little better, so you know what I mean when I say they advanced and retreated. So this is just a quick flip through. So 30,000 years ago to 20,000 years ago, they came to the right a little bit. 18, it went up, even more up, came back down a little bit, went back up. So they advanced and retreated quite a few different times. So our landscape has been completely changed and altered by all of these geologic events that we talked about. But because the glaciers were the last thing that came through in a major way, we see the most evidence of them today. And they shaped our river, the St. Croix. They deposited lots of different rocks and minerals. They've left lots of different landforms, and they have actually created the soil beneath our feet. But what actually is soil, and why does it matter? All right, I want you all to just take a second and close your eyes. I want you to picture soil, what you think of, maybe the color of it, the things that would be around you, the smell, maybe how it feels in your hands. Just take a few seconds and imagine it. Okay, you can open your eyes. So you may have been picturing something like what you see on my screen here, maybe dark brown, dirt colored, but I can tell you one thing, never say dirt in front of a soil scientist. They might get a little bit mad at you. And that's because dirt describes something that is not alive and doesn't really have a big purpose, but soil is a really important living thing. So soil scientists don't like it when people call it dirt. So the soil beneath us is actually alive. It has organic matter and minerals that kind of shape life as we know it today. So there's a big dictionary definition to what soil actually is, but I can sum it up for everyone. Soil is a loose, here are the lights that I warned us all about. Sorry, guys. There we go. So soil is a loose mineral or organic matter material that sits on the surface of the earth, and it has plants growing in it. It has been shaped by the surrounding climate, living organisms in it, the parent material, and the amount of time that it has been there for. We can break that down. It's a pretty big definition. Soil is a 4-component system. That means it is an ecosystem that has 4 things. 25% of soil is air, 25% is water, 45% minerals, and 5% is organic matter. So I think everyone has probably heard of air and water, but I want to kind of dive into what minerals and organic matter are so we can really understand what makes up the soil beneath our feet. Okay, so 45% of soil is made up of minerals, and minerals are just naturally occurring crystals that combine or they aggregate to form rocks. So rocks are just combinations of different minerals. And you may have heard this before, but I'll just mention it quickly. We have 3 different types of rocks that sit all over Earth's surface. We have igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And these different types of rocks, as you can see in our picture here, can be made of different types of minerals. And they've also been created in different ways. So as these rocks sit on the surface of the earth, they break down or weather over time. And weathering is the process of breaking down something from elements like water, wind, trees, or even humans. For example, as the wind rubs against a rock, it breaks down small little pieces of it. And as these pieces fall off, they begin to break down into different minerals and create soil. So it's a really, really slow process, and it can take hundreds or even thousands of years for rocks to break down enough to form soil from those minerals. But when that does happen, we categorize these minerals into 3 different types. So we have clay, sand, and silt. So mineral component of soil is a combination of these three different types of minerals. So each soil has a certain amount of combination of clay, sand, and silt. Um, and in our picture on the left here, you can see the size of sand is really, really big. So it has just broken down from its parent rock, and it usually looks like the rock that it is broken down from. It's often gritty, and the particles don't stick together very well or hold water very well. Then we have silt, which you can see is a little bit smaller than sand, but right in the middle there. And silt is more weathered than sand. That's why it's a little bit smaller, and it's also weathered in a different way. It also usually feels very smooth to the touch and is really great at holding water. And then we have clay. And if you look really closely on my screen, you can see clay is just that tiny little dot compared to the size of a sand particle. So if you've ever been in art class or at home doing some crafts and you're making anything with clay, it sticks together so well because the particles are so small and they hold lots of water and can become really sticky. So one of the ways that soil scientists tell what type of texture, what combination a soil has is through our USDA soil textural triangles. So it takes the amount of clay, the amount of silt, and the amount of sand, and then it gives it a texture. And we find these textures either by, hand texturing them, or there's different tests that they can do in laboratories to figure out the different combinations a soil may have. And soil texture can be really important in how much water soil can hold, what kind of nutrients it has, and how it can grow. So soils all over have different combinations, including in the St. Croix watershed. They're very unique all over. Okay, so we've got a good understanding of what mineral and texture part of soil really is. Let's talk about where soil gets that dark brown or black color that I think a lot of people picture when someone says the word soil. One of the most important parts of soil actually is the organic matter in it. The organic component is made up of non-living plant and animal matter that is in the process of breaking down. So if you've ever composted before, it's really, really similar to that process. And as this matter, these materials break down, they release nutrients that help fertilize and are really important for the soil. And just like minerals, organic matter can take a really long time to decompose, but it's really important to soil and how soil grows plants. So that picture on top is just a good zoom in on some organic matter. It looks like a lot of plant material that has been breaking down and decomposing. And then the photo on the bottom is some of my favorite organic soil. And one of our speakers was actually talking about bogs today, but this is a picture of a bog and it has really high organic content in it. Okay, so those are our main parts of soil, but there's also some other things in it. You might have heard me earlier say that the soil is alive. And that's because there are so many different living things in soil. These living things are organisms like bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, and so much more. And they're so small that we can't even see a lot of them with our own eyes, or we would need a microscope to be able to see them, but we know that they're in the soil. And they're really important because they can help decompose organic matter, keep the soil healthy, and help plants grow. There's also lots of other bigger creatures that call the soil home. You might see those on the slide as well. We've got worms, ants, mushrooms or fungi, termites, or lots of other creepy crawly creatures that are really important to soil. And then we have bigger creatures like snakes, moles, groundhogs, and more. And all of these creatures, all of these animals call the soil home. And we actually call them ecosystem engineers because they influence and help supply nutrients to the soil that they live in. So they're really important in how the soil works. Okay, so the soil is alive, but how alive do we really think it is? On average, how many living creatures are there in a teaspoon of soil? I want you to just take couple seconds to turn and talk with the people around you, or throw it in the chat, just how many living creatures there are in a teaspoon of soil. Our options are none, 3, 200, 1 million, or 1 billion. And these are all an about, so it's not an exact one in every teaspoon. But I'll give you guys just a minute to think about that. Okay, you guys ready? If you said 1 billion, you would be right. I know that sounds pretty crazy, but these creatures are so small and there's so many of them that there really is about 1 billion little microscopic creatures in a single teaspoon of soil. So just for a little bit of like, whoa moment, if people were the size of these different organisms, we could fit all of Earth's population onto 8 teaspoons. So soil is very alive because there's so many living creatures in it. All right, so now you know what makes up soil, what is in soil, why soil has formed, the combination of different minerals, organic matter, water content, and living creatures. But all soils have different amounts of all these things, and it makes them look different and also grow different things. So I want you all just to take a second and guess which of these soils is a soil that is used to grow crops, and which of the soils is a soil that is used in the forest or is growing trees or is a forested soil. I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. Okay, so if you said that the soil on the right is the one that grows crops, you would be correct. So the one on the left is the forested soil. And this is just because crops are often grown in soils with really high organic matter content, which has that dark brown or black color. And that's because in order to have healthy crops, they need a lot of nutrients, and to grow crops multiple seasons or multiple years in a row, you just need to have a lot of nutrients. And the forested soil is still a very healthy soil. It just has less organic matter in it, and it's more suited for trees instead of crops. So it's not a bad soil, it's just different. And it's 2 different types of many different types of soil. And in the United States, we even assign states a state soil. So, you know, like a state bird, state flower, we have a state soil. So this is a soil that represents what the soil in the state may look like, or maybe what is primarily produced with that soil. So the Minnesota soil is the one on the left, and it is called Lester. And Lester is a mixture of sand, silt, and clay, a really even mixture of them that we call a loam. And then we have Wisconsin state soil, which is named Antigo. And Antigo is a silt loam, which also has a really even combination of sand, silt, and clay, but a little bit more silt. And as you can see from these pictures, both of these have dark layers, organic matter layers on top. And that means that they're probably pretty good at growing crops because they have lots of nutrients. So Minnesota and Wisconsin are known for agriculture, and these soils are very representative of that. Okay, so I know that I've said this already, but I really just want to emphasize to you guys that soils look different in different places. Soils are incredibly diverse and unique, and it's not always just that dark brown stuff that we picture when we picture soil. So these are some different soils that I have found in both Wisconsin and Minnesota, and just some of my personal favorites. I'm actually going to point out in that center picture, the last gutter is what we call that. The end of it, you can see blue if you look closely. Did you know that a soil can be blue? And in this one, it's a little bit hard to see, but in person, trust me, it was like bright, bright blue. Feel free to throw in the chat why you think maybe the soil is blue, and we can talk about it afterwards, but it's pretty cool. And we also have soils in other parts of the country and the world that can be bright red, bright orange, even bright white, and so much more. So they're very, very diverse. Okay, now we know a lot about soil, what it is, and its uniqueness, but why is it important? Why do we need soils? So, as we talked about, many different things call soil home. We've got lots of different living things. And also, we know that plants need soil to grow. Soil is such an important ecosystem for plants. And in order for plants to grow and be productive, soil needs to be healthy. So, a word you might hear a lot when people talk about healthy or good soil is fertile. So, what does fertile mean? Means that something is able to grow or support life. So fertile soil has the right amount of nutrients and requirements that a plant needs to grow properly. And without that soil, we wouldn't be able to grow crops for food. We wouldn't be able to farm for food. We wouldn't have things like trees, which means we wouldn't have oxygen. And we also would have less healthy water because soil is an important part of the water cycle. Okay, so now we see how important healthy or fertile soil is. And with our climate changing, there's a couple concerns that we may have about losing healthy soil. These problems can become worse due to different effects like changes in rain or water, pollution, that kind of stuff. So we face the problem of soil erosion. It's really similar to that process of weathering we were talking about, but soil erosion is when water or wind causes soil particles to be displaced from where they originally are. So when there's bare soil, it can be blown by the wind and go elsewhere. Or if there's a lot of water, it can push the soil elsewhere to be washed away. And actually, when soil is in water, it can be really harmful to water health. And when soil is too dry or it's in a drought, it's especially likely to be eroded. We also face the problem of losing carbon storage, and carbon storage is carbon that is trapped deep underground in the soil. And when it was released into the air, it's CO2. And CO2, you might have heard of, it's a greenhouse gas that can accelerate climate change. So when we lose that good soil, we can lose a lot of carbon storage. And that's especially in wetlands. Wetlands hold a lot of carbon. Then one last problem that we can face is poor agriculture. This kind of goes hand in hand with soil erosion, but soil is not a renewable resource. So when we were talking about the glaciers, we were talking about soil forming over thousands of years. So it takes a really long time to form fertile soil. And when we use it too fast, or we suck all of the nutrients out of it from farming in ways that don't support the soil, we risk our agriculture and we risk being able to grow food. So it's really important to farm sustainably and be mindful about the climate changing, because there may be less access to things like water, or there might be more rain. And it's just really important to think about soil erosion and poor agriculture hand in hand. Oh my goodness, my slides went crazy, sorry. All right, we're back on track. And with all of that, with all of those problems, there are so many organizations and people everywhere doing their best to protect the soil. So doing their best to make sure that those problems don't happen, that we don't have to deal with those. So I just wanted to highlight a few of them so you all can know how many great things are going on in relationship to soil and climate change. So we have nonprofits like the Wetland Initiative, which is working on preserving and protecting and improving our wetlands while ensuring that they will always be protective. If you didn't know, in Wisconsin and Minnesota, wetlands are protected, but we need to make sure that that stays like that. So there's organizations that are doing that. There are indigenous organizations like Spirit Farm, which is run by the Navajo Nation, that grows their own food to combat food insecurity and also protect the landscape and the biodiversity in agriculture and soil. Native-led environmental justice movements protect about 25% of the land on Earth, which is a lot of soil. So it's a really important and wonderful thing that's happening. There's also United States government organizations like the Natural Resource Conservation Service or the United States Environmental Protection Agency that are dedicated towards studying, cleaning, and protecting soils. There's projects like the Spruce Project, which is the picture on the left, and they're studying what's going to happen to wetland soils as the climate changes, so we have a good understanding of everything. And in addition to that, farmers all over the country and also in the watershed are right now working on being sustainable and growing food in sustainable ways. So they're using cover crops and conservation tillage to avoid increased soil erosion and overuse of soil. So there is so much work going on that we could spend another 2 hours talking about all the wonderful things that are happening. The point of that is climate change impacts on soil can be really scary because we rely so heavily on it. But we have so many organizations doing great work, and our soils are hopefully going to stay happy and healthy. And with it, so do we and all the living creatures. All right, and you might be wondering now what you could do. There's lots of things that you can do either in your own backyard or your community's backyard to make sure that soils stay healthy. You can compost. Composting, like organic matter, is a great way to make sure that new soils have lots of important nutrients. You're also going to be reducing food waste and ensuring that you have a successful garden. So it's kind of a win-win-win. So if you compost at home, you can ask your parents or your guardians about it, ask them to help get involved. If you don't compost, maybe it's something you can get started at home or in your neighborhood. Your city may also actually collect food waste to be composted. All right, you can garden with that compost. You can start gardening and growing your own food, and also you're ensuring that the soil in your backyard or in your neighborhood is going to be covered, so there's less chance of soil erosion or runoff. So the less bare soil, the better. This really makes a difference. So many cities have community gardens that you can help out at, or you can have one in your own backyard, whatever works best for you, but there's lots of ways that you can get involved. And if you are looking to get involved, you can volunteer. There's so many different organizations that want students just like you. So if you're interested, please feel free to send a chat and I can give you some more information about different organizations that could use students just like you. Okay, you are all now soil scientists, at least I say so. And as soil scientists, it's important to do a couple of things. I want to encourage you to keep on learning, keep asking questions and keep being curious. There's so many things that you can continue to do to learn about not only soil, but your environment and about climate change. So if you are interested by the concept of soil or what it is or learning more, keep on going, keep on learning. Knowledge is so powerful, and with that power, you can take care of the environment around you. Also, importantly, spread the word. As a soil scientist, you probably now know more about soil than most people do. So you can tell them about it, introduce them to the secret world of soil. You can be a teacher. All right, and finally, you have done something like super incredibly important by just showing up today. By learning about past climate changes, learning about the watershed, about the importance of soil, the relationship between soil and climate change, you're doing your part to protect soil today. Yeah, and you know, we talked about a lot today. We talked about the minerals in soil, the organic matter, the living creatures. We talked about the glaciers, lots of past geologic movements. But I just want to finish up really quickly before we get to questions. And just to remind you, without soil, we would not be able to survive. It might not always look like much. People might not think that much of it, but you now know it's secret. And as soil scientist and chief of the USDA Bureaus of Chemistry and Soils, Charles Kellogg once said, essentially, all life depends upon the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. All right, thank you all so much for listening and digging into soil with me. I encourage you after this to get outside and get your hands dirty in the soil because you never know what you may find. And we'll take the rest of the time to go over any questions that you may have, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Claire, for that wonderful presentation. I had no clue that we had a state soil, so I think that's really, really awesome.
Yes.
We do have a few minutes for the questions and answers. I'll check the chat right now and see if we have any. We do have one in the chat right now. Do you have a favorite type of soil?
You know, I do. I go back and forth between my favorite types, but usually when I'm out in the field, my favorite type of soil to see is a really sandy soil that has a lot of things growing on it. My personal favorite texture is actually a sandy clay, because some soil scientists believe that it doesn't exist. You don't often see it out in nature. So the first time I found one was really, really exciting. So that's usually my favorite.
That's really cool. That had to be really rewarding as well.
Yeah, you know what, it was. I was very, maybe too excited about it. So
I love that. We don't have any more questions in the chat right now, but we'll kind of just hang out and see if any pop in. I actually do have a question for you. I was wondering how you became interested in studying soil.
Yeah, you know what? I took a class, a basic introductory soil science class, my sophomore year of college, and I never stopped taking classes about it. I just was like so amazed by it because I had never heard of what soil really was. So it really just drew me in, and I never stopped. So I joined. I became a TA for that class, and then I joined my university soil judging team, and I got out in the field, you know, as much as I could.
That is so cool. And you never stopped playing in the dirt since, huh?
Yeah, no, I have not. That's
soil.
Oh yeah, you know. How dare you? Don't worry, I'm not one of those soil scientists that will yell at anyone, but a few of my professors felt very passionately about it.
I love that. Yes, feel free, if anybody has any lingering questions, go ahead and throw them in for Claire. No, I think it was a really great presentation. I think people often forget that soil is full of living organisms and it's not just stagnant soil. It's moving underneath us. That is super cool to think about.
Wow. Billions of little guys just right there.
Yes. Yeah, there was a session earlier that talked about nature journaling. So it'd be really cool to go out and look at some soil and maybe see what you could journal from just looking at a little handful of soil and what you
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that would be a really fun activity to do. A good way to get out there and start learning more.
Yes. I think we'll give it one more minute here or so, and then we can close it on up. I also thought it was really interesting the how you collected the soil samples on the gutters. I never thought about how you would collect soil samples or compare them, but
really cool. Yeah, we use. I didn't in one of the pictures, you could kind of see it in the background, but I didn't talk about it at all. We get those from augers. So if you know, like ice fishing augers, we use soil augers, and we pull up about this much at a time, and then we place it into the gutter to recreate that soil profile.
Oh, very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we also have things. Some of those pictures were soil pits, so they'll get people with like bigger equipment to dig like full pits that you like walk into. So it just depends on what kind of research you need to do, or if you're doing like a soil judging activity. Just depends on like what you're looking for.
Wow, I would have never known. That is so cool. All right, well, with no more questions in the chat, I'm gonna go ahead and sign us on out here. I would love to just take these last couple of minutes to thank you all for joining us today for the 2024 St. Croix Youth Summit. This presentation and all others will be shared in the coming weeks on Wild Rivers Conservancy's YouTube account, and the links will be shared with all of you who attended today. You will also be receiving a survey tomorrow. Please take a moment to share both what you enjoyed and what you think could be improved upon for next year's Youth Summit. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining.